Hello YouTube, welcome to the Violin Masterclass for the YouTube Symphony Orchestra. My name is Maxine Kwok-Adams and I play violin with the London Symphony Orchestra. I'm going to start by talking a bit about the Tan Dun piece that you've hopefully downloaded. In the first violin music, there's a repetitive bowing exercise which comes throughout the whole piece. I'm going to talk a bit about how you should approach this. Actually, what's printed in your music is probably not the best approach for bowing, so I'm going to give you an idea of what you might find a bit easier. This would be bar 31, the opening allegro, and I'm going to play it slowly so that you can see the bowing that I'm doing. It's a lot easier to do a ricochet rather than what's actually printed, because it's going to get a lot faster through the whole piece, and this will work whether you're starting from the opening tempo to when it gets probably about twice as fast towards the end. So I'm going to play that section and you can see what I mean. The important thing with this bowing is that you don't throw your bow too far. As it gets louder, it is easier to do that, but if you can try and keep your bow as close to the string as you can, that would really help with articulation. And remember, if you make it to the orchestra, there will be a large number of people doing this, so you can't afford to have a whole load of people splashing their bows about. And come to the Allegro vivace, which is in 98. It's the same principle with the bowing, but this time it's incorporated into the tune of the piece. So you can do the same thing, but make sure you bring out all the notes that are accented and actually try and make them different from the staccato notes, something like this. That way you actually get a part of the tune, and there's a lot of heavy brass and percussion playing there, and you will actually be heard. There's also some passages with chords, for example 59 and towards the end. You should never worry about having to play the entire chord as one. You might want to do that when you're playing solo, but in an orchestral situation, if you want to divide the chords, no one is going to mind. And it's probably clearer if you do so. Actually, you can play the chords non-Davies at 59, that would work, but I would suggest when you get to 141, the tempo is really fast by here, so it's probably better rather than going, which doesn't sound nice and doesn't come out very well, if you just aim for the top three or the bottom three notes, so rhythmically it's a lot stronger, so you get something like this. That would be a lot easier to manage. I think that's the most difficult parts for the first violin for the Tan Dun sorted. And the other piece I wanted to talk to you about today is called The Enigma Variations by an English composer called Edward Elgar. I'll start with the opening theme, the Enigma theme, which Elgar has written as his whole variations are based upon. If you get a chance to see the music for this, you'll notice that the music is all incredibly quiet, but Elgar has actually written a dynamic or a tenuto pretty much on every single note. So even though there's not a lot going on there to actually play technically, there is so much musically to play. So you have to be aware of the phrase doesn't always crescendo where you expect. In fact, it probably diminuendos where you're not expecting it. So that's the opening of the whole piece. So that's very important. The next tricky part is a very famous second variation, which is very famous for violinists because it usually goes wrong. So it's something that if you're planning to be in an orchestra or you would like to play in amateur orchestras or youth orchestras, it's something that if you learn this, you're bound to have to play it at some point. So I will play the opening of it and then I'll talk a bit about the pitfalls. That didn't sound like much, but that was a lot of notes. The most important thing is that you start from the string. When you're playing in an orchestra and that is multiplied by 16 people, if everyone starts off the string, it just ends up sort of being a mess. So if you start from on the string and keep very close to the string with an even bounce, it should work a lot easier. Even though there's a lot of string crossings in this section, and I'm not here to give you a definitive fingering because everybody has their own favourite fingering for these passages. It's important to keep close to the string and not let the string crossings dictate the way that your bow starts to move. It's very difficult, but it's best to get that so you get an even line. And the last thing I will talk to you about in this piece is perhaps the most famous movement of all, which is the 9th variation and is called Nimrod. And this was supposedly written for Elgar's best friend. Often this movement is taken out of the Nimrod variations and played as a concert piece on its own, and actually the LSO often play this movement as an encore whenever we tour abroad. The opening melody for the first violins is something very special and is written 3 pianos. So I'm just going to give you an idea of what sort of dynamic you have to play, because it's 3 pianos is very different when you're perhaps playing as a soloist, but 3 pianos within an orchestra is a very different thing altogether. So this should give you an idea of how quietly you should attempt to play this if you're playing it within an orchestra. Now, you shouldn't worry too much if certain notes don't sound as true as you would like, as I demonstrated just now. Within an orchestra, if 16 of us are making that kind of sound, then that is going to sound beautiful when it's actually in the concert hall. The important thing for this section is that use minimal vibrato so that it doesn't disturb the pitch and the tonality of the actual section. And you have to save bow so that you don't bulge when it's not necessary, because there's a bit where there's 3 bars in a bow and then only 2 notes in a bow, and you mustn't just suddenly just go like this. You have to actually sustain so that there will be enough sound and it won't sound out of place. I hope you found this session useful, and I strongly encourage as many of you as possible to download the tan-done parts and get involved with this project. Thank you and goodbye.
Hello YouTube. Welcome to the masterclasses for the YouTube Symphony Orchestra. something very, very new in this world. I'm Evgeny Grach. I'm principal second with the LSO, and I invite you to participate in this project together with us. Tandun Internet Symphony Eroica. What an interesting title, Internet Symphony. I see that the first time in my life. And it's actually it's very interesting because it didn't exist before. For me, this Internet Symphony not just means internet, it means much wider. It's international. And the piece is very short. But the idea of the piece, for me, I don't know what composer will see, but for me it was like it's very international. It's how to get the people together and how to get all the people listening to this music and to the other music and to the classical music in general. From this point of view, it reminds me a little bit. Of course, it's completely different. But remember Beethoven Ninth Symphony and the words, and international words, how all the people should get together and fight for the peace and understand better each other. There's not specific technical difficulties in this piece, but the interesting thing that it's only 5 minutes piece, and it has 4 movements. So many characters you have. Basically, it's all based on the same rhythm, which when the LSO recorded this symphony, was quite a discussion about what sort of bow stroke we have to use for that. Because originally it was written like, and it didn't work in this section. So we tried 2 or 3 different varieties of the bowings. And we found finally this one, which actually was working absolutely perfect. And in different tempos, it was just wonderful how we played that together. Also, what is interesting about this piece is Allegro vivace last movement. This last movement is going to gradually, we have to play faster and faster. It starts from the crochet 140. Then the next section goes più mosso 150. The next says again più mosso 160. The next 170, and the last one is 180. How to get the whole orchestra gradually get faster and faster in the same point. That was the major difficulties actually in the recording session of this symphony. And we did it various times. And I remember that the conductor wants to conduct in 2, conductor and the composer of this piece. And then he received the suggestion of the leader to conduct it actually in 4. And that was working perfectly, and finally we recorded the piece. What else? There is basically it's based in different music from different composers, different times. As it says, Eroica, of course, the composer uses the music of Beethoven, Eroica, Symphony Number 3, and there was a Chinese, beautiful Chinese tune in the middle of the piece. But I think the main tune of this piece, it sounds like, again, which I started with, it's very, very, very international. It sounds like... So it reminds the big choir, the big orchestra, all singing and all playing together, and the audience probably participating in that. Brahms, the Symphony Number 4. Last movement, one of the greatest pieces written for the orchestra. That's the first reason why we're using this piece for the auditions, for the young players doing auditions in the orchestra. And we're looking for various things to show us how actually the player prepared for playing in such a great orchestra as LSO. First of all, it's an understanding of style, of Brahms' style, and better to say how the LSO plays the Brahms symphonies, because I think it's absolutely great. In the accept, there is various problems that the young players can actually face. The first problem, I think, is the rhythm, and just to keep in tempo all the time. I can show actually what I mean. Is the main tune. Rhythmically, the usual mistake is not to count really the quavers inside of the dotted crotchet. It's dum, dum, 1, 2, 3, da, that is usually cut. Then the next problem is the letter B when it goes to. For some reason, we can hear the tempo actually moving forward every time. And there's no indication giving us by Brahms that the tempo should be faster or slower or whatever. If the wish of the conductor is like that, it's fine, but usually we're looking to keep the playing in the same tempo, in a very strong rhythm. Then the next section will be the letter C, which represents the difficulties for the violin player, the typical intonation difficulties. So it's like this position change. Actually, and the most difficult is to get to this C sharp. And if the person really can do it in tune and with a good sound and a very good rhythm, it actually shows how classy the player is. Then the next section, going in the semi-quavers, it's very important too, because it's a stability of the rhythm, and also the bow stroke, the typical Brahms bow stroke, which is not completely détaché or any other. It's a sort of mixture between the détaché, heavy spiccato, and also the player should pay attention that it starts in forte, then it going crescendo, which many times, unfortunately, we can't hear that. So it's this crescendo, and every of those phrases is terribly important. Then the problem is to pay maximum attention to the dynamics, because in the Brahms music, many times it happens that it says forte, crescendo, crescendo sempre più, and it comes back to forte. So what to do in these sort of cases? You have to find the place where you can actually drop down the volume of your playing and go again for forte. That's going to be another crescendo. It's a very difficult, the typical problem for the interpreting the Brahms pieces. What else I can say? This is a little bit difficult for any violin player to keep playing in two strings, crossing them all the time. Especially if it requires diminuendo or going to the piano, and it actually shows as well the level or standard of playing this piece. And basically, again, going back to the beginning, I would say that it's very important thing to know what actually this music represents for the whole musical world, the world of classical music. It's a style of playing exactly the Brahms Fourth Symphony. So for me, it's full of passion, but at the same time, you cannot open everything. It's not like Tchaikovsky playing. You know, it's still reserved, and it's very solid, and it's very stable and fixed, I would say. So it's just the beginning of it again. And just to keep in the same tempo, the whole accept. That would be great to hear of the young players. Hopefully you find this useful, and we all encourage you to participate in this wonderful project.
Hello, welcome to the masterclasses for the YouTube Symphony Orchestra. I'm Paul Silverthorne and I play principal viola with the London Symphony Orchestra. And I'm here hoping to give you a few tips on Tan Dun's piece. This is a unique piece as far as I know, and it's been written to be played by people who will be found by the internet throughout the world. This is a marvellous opportunity for musicians from all over the globe to meet and play together. The piece is going to be very exciting. It's very much like a kind of festive fanfare overture. So most of what we're doing is very rhythmical and needs to be very crisp and brilliant. The main figure we have is this rhythmic figure. And at some point or other, everybody is playing that. So for it to have its effect, everybody has to play very rhythmically and very clearly. The other thing is you don't want to get exhausted with this quite tricky movement. So make sure that you do most of the fast movement with your fingers and your wrist. Otherwise, you'll get very stiff and tired and you won't play as rhythmically. So in slow motion, watch. Most of the movement should be done here in the hand and the fingers so that the arm is not constantly under tension. So this gets louder to fortissimo, but still don't move much more, just move more towards the heel of the bow, or the frog, as people call it in other countries. So you go from... So that's that. The next main feature we have is some really nice, brilliant 3- and 4-note chords. This is not an opportunity, I'm afraid, for big spread chords. No time for that, it's not that kind of piece. So really sharp and grab them. And a whole string section playing like that will be quite an awesome sound. So practice that as well. Later on we do have one short go at the tune. And really enjoy that when you get into it, but make sure you keep the tempo because everybody else will still be doing the yum-ba-da-dum-dum rhythm as well. So big full sound, but keep an ear open for the rhythm. And then we go back to our rhythmic pattern again and end up with some nice big C major chords. What could be nicer on the viola? Obviously a very fine composer. He knew how to write for his instrument. I hope those tips on the Tan Dun are helpful and that you enjoy playing the piece. Now, I thought I'd give you a few more tips on some audition pieces that you might find yourself having to play at some point in the future. One of the commonest and one of the trickiest is the scherzo from Mendelssohn's music to Shakespeare's Midsummer Night's Dream. Beautiful, light scherzo and therefore very tricky. It relies on being able to do a very supple and light spiccato that you can control at any speed that a conductor might want. And this, as before, requires great flexibility in the fingers and wrist. It's no use trying to play it all with arm movement, otherwise you just get... which is something I've seen, sadly, in many auditions. You need to have all the freedom of movement in the fingers and wrists so that the bow can bounce freely and flexibly. If you get it right, you can play it at any speed a conductor might want. So, way to practice this is not to practice it with this piece, otherwise you'll get in a mess. Take one of the standard studies like Kreutzer No. 2 and And watch that the arm takes a very passive role in this and is only moving gently up and down as you cross the string, and everything else happens with a flexible wrist and finger movement. Another piece that you're almost bound to have to play in an audition at some point or other is the Stamitz Concerto in D major. That's always there because, unfortunately, we haven't got any Mozart concertos to offer, and Stamitz is the nearest thing. And people want to hear it to see if you've got a grasp of classical style, can play melodies beautifully, and have got a clean and elegant technique. All of these things are very hard to achieve. It's unfortunate that it starts with a rather awkward first few bars, and many people come to grief on that. So just a few little tips on how to get over that. There's a tendency to think of it as an awkward chord followed by a bit of tune, then an awkward chord followed by a bit of tune. And if you can get that out of your head and just think of the top note of the chord as being the beginning of the tune, you'll make a better start. So that instead of it being followed by, then again, make sure that you think melodically from the very first note, and that the chord also doesn't make you snatch the bow back either too quickly or too slowly to the second note. So have a very clear idea of the rhythm before you start, have the feeling of the accompaniment jogging away in the back of your mind before you play, and then launch straight into it melodically. That way you have a good chance of making a good impression, because the first 8 bars are the crucial ones of any audition piece. People will make up their minds, sadly, on the very first thing they hear. So make sure that you deliver a really nicely phrased package for that first 2 phrases. Think also very carefully about making the first 2 phrases very clear in their 2-bar structure. They're short, don't be ashamed of that. Phrase them as short phrases. That's one short phrase, followed by an identical one. And as has always been the case, 2 plus 2 is 4. So we now have a 4-bar phrase to balance it. And if you get that feeling of balance, you also make a much more satisfying presentation of the opening phrase. This kind of phrase structure occurs throughout the movement, and if you pay attention to that, it will enhance anything that you do in terms of phrasing and tone that you've been working at.
Welcome to the YouTube Masterclasses. I'm Alastair Blayden, and I play the cello as sub-principal in the London Symphony Orchestra. I'm going to talk to you about Tan Dun's Internet Symphony, the Eroica, and just point out a few sections that, having played it with Tan Dun, we needed to think about in detail. The first is at figure 14, where there's a situation where we ran out of bow. Just a counter melody, a sort of harmonic progression of notes. But we found that we actually needed more bow from figure 15, and because in the big balance of the orchestra, we just needed to have more bow there. And at figure 22, the same thing, where it suddenly became this kind of rising, wave-like motif. We just, instead of it being printed like this, we found we were starved of bow, so we just, which works much better for us anyway. The next thing that I want to talk about is 28, figure 28, where the allegro begins. There's a bowing that's printed as, and en masse, we all decided in the string section that this was more powerful. So it just worked better on a larger scale for us all to be doing that unanimously. Moving further on, figure 51 is where the tune, the actual Eroica tune, appears in C major. And we initially began that by playing it piano. But I think probably in the balance, it's better to bring that out immediately. And then we moved on to where basically it's the same rhythm as I was talking about before. But it comes back as allegro vivace, and that was substantially quicker than we'd expected. So it's worth bearing in mind that that is going to be significantly quicker than anything you've done before. And that, basically, from the cello point of view, is it. So I wish you well and good luck with your learning of this particular piece. I've been asked to present for you another extract that we regularly hear at the London Symphony Orchestra for auditions. It's Tchaikovsky's Symphony No. 6, The Pathétique. And it's a very interesting piece because on the face of it, it's quite an easy piece to play. But there's so much in it that makes it quite a demanding excerpt to play under an audition situation. It's marked Allegro con grazia, and it's very easy for it to feel like it's being ironed. And that's not how it should feel at all. It wants the grazia part of it is the essential part, and it needs to feel as though the music is going over the bar line. And then, if anything, the calmest part of the bar is in the middle of the bar because it's written in 5/4, which makes it really very interesting to play. I'll show you what I mean. So this is amazing for you. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1. Or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So the middle of the bar is the calm part. But then in addition to this micro phrasing is the bigger shape, which adds to the complexity because it goes so far, like all Tchaikovsky phrases, it goes for miles. There's that first section, and then there's the section where many people think it's still the tune, but it's not. At figure 9, the rest of the orchestra starts to interrupt, to take up the idea of the theme. And here it's not a tune, but it's accompanying it. It needs to feel sympathetic to everything else that's going on. Of course, it's still grazioso, and it still needs to have that feeling of the lilt that we had in the tune when we were playing the tune. And it carries on. Now, what happens here? It'd be wonderful in an audition situation to get the feeling of the person who's playing the audition being part of a section, but also taking an initiative to show a shape in that first time bar where it goes. so often we hear, and the whole moment is completely devoid of any sense of what actually happens in a concert situation. And then there's another section that happens after the repeat, so you can imagine we carry on this time. This is a hard section to play convincingly because there are a lot of repeated notes that can very easily get lost, and as a section you have to be quite hard to make sure that they're audible. As a section it's even harder, in fact. And I think it's really important that they are heard, otherwise the grace of the music is missing. So there we have it. That is the complete section in its entirety, and I hope this has been useful for you in your preparation for the auditions, and I wish you all very well and good luck. Bye.
Hello YouTube and welcome to the Double Bass Masterclass. I am Rinat Ibragimov and I am Principal Double Bass with the London Symphony Orchestra. I would like to give you a few tips for your coming audition for YouTube Symphony Orchestra. First piece I would like to start is Internet Symphony Eroica by Tan Dun. As you could see, this piece starts with buttock pizzicato. This pizzicato is dangerous not only because if you play in the wrong time, all the orchestra will laugh at you, which happened in the first rehearsal with me. But also it's very difficult to play together with the whole section. It's very rare perfectly together. So I suggest when you play this pizzicato, you do it in one go with one motion rather than preparation playing. Do it in one go, as I can demonstrate you now. Next bit is trills. As you could see, these trills are marked with triple forte. It's very, very loud. And also we have accents on every note, which in this loud dynamic very difficult to mark. So to make sure these accents come through, we need to do little commas before every note. And last bit in this piece I would like to draw attention is this rhythmical section. It needs to be quite clear, and there are some challenging shifts with octave C and back, which difficult to get in tune and with a clear sound. So I suggest you to play quite close to the string, not to jump too much, otherwise we can easily lose control. So I think it should sound something like that. In that difficult shift, I suggest that we should keep our finger, which we arrive on, already on the fingerboard, so we have less chance to miss the top C. And let's move now to our basic repertoire. I would like to start with Mozart Symphony number 39, first movement. Opening Adagio. What is important here to keep pulse even when we have breaks, to keep this pulse going through all the time and make sure the rhythm is always in our head. In the last moment, I wanted to play that beautiful tune we have. I suggest that we should keep one long line and to see the end of this 15 bass phrase. What we should remember that this tune is related with the next excerpt and should be played in the same tempo. What I can suggest that we have slight separation in articulation between first quaver and next semiquaver, and also to phrase the whole bar to the next one, not to stack and divide this bar in fragments, but rather have a line and direction. Next bit is quite difficult technically. It's very difficult to get clear semiquavers. I suggest again that we shouldn't jump too much and keep our bow quite close to the string so we control the pitch of the notes. And the last piece will be Beethoven recitative from Symphony number 9. As we know, the structure of this symphony is quite unique because first 3 movements are instrumental, and in the last moment, composer was using the quartet of singers and the chorus. Richard Wagner said that Beethoven orchestration was so rich, and by the end of third movement, he exhausted all the resources, and because of that, he had to use more forces, such as chorus and singers. What is also extraordinary about this piece that the first recitative is given to the group of instrumentalists, and it directly related to the actual recitative, which is sang by baritone few bars later. The words of this recitative are Beethoven's own words, and the meaning of these words are, "O friends, not these tones, let us sing more cheerful songs and more joyful." So the spirit of these words should be throughout our playing of this recitative. So I hope you found this session useful and really encourage you to get involved in this project.
Hello YouTube, welcome to the masterclass for the YouTube Symphony Orchestra. My name's Gareth Davies and I'm Principal Flautist with the London Symphony Orchestra. I'm going to tell you a little bit about playing this piece and what it's like to do an audition on the flute for an orchestra. Now the most important thing is not to be nervous. It's easy for me to say that because I'm absolutely terrified doing this at the moment, but I'll do my best. Now this piece we've got, the Internet Symphony Eroica by Tan Dun, is a fantastic piece which you've probably already heard. I'm going to give you a few pointers about how to play bits of it which are tricky, bits of it which are easy, and a few tips to help you make it sound really good. Tan Dun has written quite a lot of different accents, different dynamics and things. It's very easy to forget those, but if you play those out, we can really hear the difference, and that will make the difference between a really good performance and a fantastic performance. So if you've got the music in front of you, let's start halfway through. Seems like a good idea. If we go to the Allegro vivace, that's in bar 98, or measure 98 if you're in America. Now, you'll notice there's a forte marking. Now, that means loudly, as you probably know, but if you look further on in the music, it goes to fortissimo, and right at the end in the last few bars is triple fortissimo. So don't play too loudly. Now, this tune repeats quite a lot. You'll hear that tune quite a lot in this piece, particularly in the flute part. Now, if you look at it, it's forte, so not too loud, and there's an accent on the very first note, the top G sharp. Don't be scared to really punch those accents out. If you've heard the performance already, it's a very exciting piece. So if you don't play those accents, it will sound really quite dull and repetitive. In bar 99, we've got accents on the last four quavers or eighth notes and on the first one, so really make them come out. If you listen to the difference, I'll play it without accents. Okay, sounds fine. And now with accents. You can hear the difference, it sounds a bit more exciting. I probably did that a bit too much over the top, but there you go. Now, the other thing is, the great thing about playing the flute in an orchestra, and it's no different in this piece, is that you get to play the tune a lot. Often you're singing soaring on the top. Now, if I remember rightly, the tune in bar 106 is doubled with the violins and trumpets as well, I think. So you actually get a fantastic sound. It can make you feel like you're playing some kind of enormous flute. So this is the tune at bar 106. That's a really great tune. It's marked fortissimo, so already we're a bit louder. And in bar 107, there's a crescendo as well. So you can really afford to play out. Now, if we go back to near the beginning of the piece, if you look at bar measure 77, it's in 3/8, so that's 3 quavers or eighth notes in the bar. Now, if you then skip forwards about 5 or 6 bars to bar 82, it goes to 7/16. Don't panic, it's not that difficult. But make sure you play the right rhythm, because it's not an even number of beats in the bar, because it goes 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. So make sure you've got that rhythm right. I don't want to hear your recordings playing it in still a 2/4 bar or kind of just fudging it slightly so it doesn't sound quite right. The rhythm is this. This is bar 82. So it's 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. Just make sure you've got that right, because it's quite important. Otherwise, you'll finish before everybody else. Now, when you're doing an audition, you'll be asked to play another piece as well. It's entirely up to you what you play, but do play something you can play well. If you haven't got very good fingers, don't play Flight of the Bumblebee. Or if you've got a really nice sound, play a nice slow tune that sounds great, but do something that makes you sound good. We've been auditioning recently for flutes in the London Symphony Orchestra, and the one piece that everybody is always asked to play is the Mozart Flute Concerto. In G major or in D major, it's up to you. I like the G major one. it's a good piece to play in an audition because people on a panel will know it. If you play some obscure piece, they might not know how it's supposed to go. It's a good idea to play something like this. It shows off the flute in its nicest register. It's just a nice piece. It goes a little something like this. It's a nice piece to play. It sounds good. Maybe you'd like to do that one. Remember that you're the soloist. If you're sitting in the orchestra, you sometimes have to come out of the texture and play a solo, and then other times you have to sit back and let somebody else have the tune. If you're playing the concerto, you walk on stage, everybody's paid money to see you playing, and you have the solo part. Now, in the Mozart concerto, there are 30 bars or 30 measures, introduction, before you come in. Everybody's standing there. You're getting a bit nervous. You've got 30 bars to prepare yourself and then put your flute up and really give the audience what they want. Now, when you walk into an audition room, you have to look really confident. It's the same when you're doing it in front of the camera. You have to look like you know what you're doing so that we know that if you get chosen to come to Carnegie Hall, you can do the job. Make sure you choose a piece that you can play well, that you're confident playing, and shows you off to the best of your abilities. And then who knows, maybe we'll be seeing you in Carnegie Hall. Hello YouTube and welcome to the masterclass from the London Symphony Orchestra. My name's Gareth Davies, I'm the principal flautist in the orchestra and I'm going to be showing you a bit about playing the piccolo. Now, the piccolo is the highest relation to the flute and it's the highest instrument in the orchestra and also the loudest. Although it's very small, it's very, very powerful. Now, in this tan dun piece, a lot of the music you'll be playing is very high and is very loud. Don't be scared of it. Tan dun, as every other composer knows, that the piccolo is a very loud instrument when it wants to be. So if he writes forte or fortissimo, play forte and fortissimo. Just make sure you stand back from the microphone. Now, I'm going to give you a few pointers about how to play this piece. The piccolo, quite a lot of the time in this, doubles what the flute does. That is to say, it plays exactly the same, but it's an octave higher. So if you've perhaps looked at the flute part, you'll already know some of the music from this. So if we go to the middle of this piece, about bar 98, that's the Allegro vivace, that's where the piece really gets going. Now it's only forte to begin with, which is loud, but if you look right through to the end, it's triple forte, which is very, very loud. So don't play too loudly at the beginning. A good tip for playing music like this is if you look at it, there's a lot of accents. So although it's loud, make sure the notes that have got accents on are a little bit louder so you can really pick them out. Now the piccolo's very good at doing that, particularly if you look in bar 105, 104 and 105. There are a lot of accents and some of the notes are low and some of them are high. Those top notes are really going to stick out, particularly on the piccolo, but just enjoy the attention. So, the Allegro vivace. So you can really hear in bar 106 those accents. So make sure you do that because that makes the difference between it sounding really good and sounding fantastic. Now you get to play the tune as well on the piccolo. Again, it's an octave higher than the flute and I think with the trumpets as well and the first violins. So there's a real sense of playing over the top and really enjoying. It often feels to me like you're soaring like a bird playing over the top of the orchestra. So really enjoy it. So that's where you get to play the tune. It comes round again in 126. So if we go back to nearer the beginning of the piece, in bar 55, again, we've got some accents which are really important. Now, Tan Dun has written the accents, so they're on the higher notes. Now, the higher notes are already going to stick out, but he definitely wants them to stick out. So make sure that we can really hear that on your audition tape. It's only mezzo piano, so it doesn't need to be too loud. So you can really hear those top ones really leap out at you. Make sure we can hear that difference. Now if you leap ahead to bar 80, this is where it starts getting a little bit complicated rhythmically. The rhythm itself isn't very complicated, but you'll notice it changes from 3/8 to 7/16, then back to 3/8. Just make sure you get that rhythm right, because it's very easy just to be happily playing along and not notice the 7/16 bars. If you don't get them right, it won't fit in with what everybody else is doing. So if you look at the 7/16 bar, which is bar 82, if you think of it in 2 2s and a 3, so it goes da 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 ba ba ba. 1 2 1 2 1 2 3. So it's not longer, it's not shorter, it's just the right length. Make sure you get it right. If you look in bar 77, there's a tune you might recognise. Tan Dun's used Beethoven's Eroica theme, but he's changed it slightly because we got this rhythm, which we've already heard in some of the other bits. Now, because you are the highest instrument in the orchestra, and quite possibly the loudest at this point, and it's also marked triple fortissimo, you need to really make sure you get this one out. So from bar 77, so you probably recognise that tune, but it's a little bit changed. Now, when you do an audition, you're going to have to play another piece. You might want to play an orchestral excerpt and put that up in your film, or you might want to play another piece. I've got another little piece here. It's by Bach, J.S. Bach. The difficulty with the piccolo sometimes is that there's not lots and lots of pieces, unlike the violin or the cello. So a lot of piccolo players will often play a flute piece in an audition, which is exactly what I'll do for you now. This is the slow movement of J.S. Bach's A minor partita. Now, the important thing is to find something that you're comfortable playing with. If you're a whiz on the fingers and you can play really fast and tongue really fast, and you think we might find that impressive, play something really fast. If it's not your forte or your strong point, play something slower. So I'm going to play something slow for you. That's something that makes the piccolo sound nice. Don't just play something really, really loud, because we've already had that in the Tan Dun. When you play that, we've got lots of fast music, lots of accents, something very loud. Play something that's a contrast. It might be your favourite tune, it might be a very famous tune, or it might be a folk song from where you're from, something like that. But choose something that you're comfortable with. When you're doing an audition, the important thing is to remember that the people listening, and that's me, want you to be good. I want you to do well. I want to sit there hearing somebody playing the piccolo or the flute really nicely. I don't want to hear a load of rubbish. So pick something that you're really happy with and do your best. And then maybe we might be seeing you in Carnegie Hall.
Hello, I'm Emanuel Abbühl. I'm the principal oboe from London Symphony Orchestra, and I would like to give a short masterclass on Tan Dun's Internet Symphony, written for a project to reassemble many players and invite people to come to New York to join 1 week. And this film is made as well to encourage people who maybe not have yet a lot of skill, and I will explain some technical aspects of the Tan Dun piece, how to practice and how to present a masterclass on a video. Yeah. So let's go through this Tan Dun oboe part first. So maybe check that you play well tuned. So check your C major, and because basically some parts are written in C major, other parts are in E major. Yeah? So before you practice or start to record, just check that your tuning is really good. So maybe just play E major scale to be sure that you have all. And C major. And so check that your tuning is stable. Good, so let's see into that piece. First of all, the composer wrote a lot of exact dynamic. So he has a triple forte, mezzo piano, till pianissimo, as everything is written exactly. The articulation is written precisely. So all you have to show this in your film. It will be judged because it makes a difference if you just play forte or mezzo forte. So, for example, the beginning should be really loud. Good. So, strong accents, fast trills. Then the next part is written dolce molto. Maybe it has more expressive part. So we have to be clear as well about the tuning, E major. So give enough air to blow the octave step to the E natural and just sing. Yeah? The oboe has often the main tune, like principal violin or flute, so this will be probably one. Then let's go on. It's come more rhythmical session. So 31. Maybe we need double tonguing for this. So it's going from 31 till the end is always going faster. And to play this rhythm with single tonguing is maybe a bit difficult, unless you have a very fast tongue. Then Tan Dun wrote a low G natural for the oboe, which we don't have on the instrument. So I propose you play just one octave up. It will be in the bar 81. Otherwise, we don't have a low G, so we can't play it. Good, that's about Tan Dun's piece. And so important is practice well and play with a lot of dynamic, a good pulse. Maybe you can use a metronome to practice. Then enjoy the rhythm, enjoy the dancing of this, and try maybe to show this one theme of Eroica is so maybe you can listen to the symphony. There's a recording from LSO, so you get some inspiration how to play, to get Beethoven into Tan Dun. Huh? So the second piece I proposed to play is the first romance of Robert Schumann's 3 romances, Opus 94, because you have the chance to express yourself and to play a long slurred tune, so to show musicality and accuracy and musical maturity. So to express, to sing more than just to play repeated staccato notes from the first piece. But you're open to choose any other piece. I just show a little bit about that piece because as an orchestra player, you often have to play expressive tunes. So the oboe has a very important part in the orchestra to express themes, like the first violin, first flute, first clarinet, maybe more than other instruments do. So composer wrote a lot of themes for the oboe. And for example, Schumann, he had in his second symphony, the second movement, starts with a oboe solo. Etc. Or in the fourth symphony, we have a solo oboe and cello together, as well as slow movement. Etc. Again, it's a Spanish tune. Then I play a little bit of the beginning of the first romance, and you hear a similarity. Yeah? So, in this piece, I think, first of all, it has very little tongued notes. Most of the short tongue notes. There's a lot of slurs. So you need a lot of air to express with air and espressivo, vibrato, dynamic, the line, what Schumann wanted to have. Helpful is as well to see if you can play piano, or you can ask somebody to play for you, or listen to a recording, to study what's going on beneath, which harmony is playing together with you. For example, the beginning starts you have already sort of a G major 7th chord in the fourth bar. So check the harmony and play as well with the dynamic following to the harmony. Yes, so I think it's a good choice to choose Schumann. You can choose as well Mozart, concerto, first movement, and just anything you can you're sure of to present well. And to record a tape for an audition is not so easy. Prepare well, that's always the most important, be well prepared. Then I think choose a good hall where the sound is not too dry or too bright, and as well not too strong, too over acoustic. So it should be a good mixture in the sound quality, and don't stand too close to the mic and not too far away. So enjoy and good luck. So bye-bye.
Hello YouTube. Welcome to the masterclasses for the YouTube Symphony Orchestra. I'm Christine Pendrill and I play the Cor Anglais in the London Symphony Orchestra. Today I'm going to talk about preparing Tan Dun's Internet Symphony, the Cor Anglais part, for an audition. Generally, Cor Anglais parts are very melodic. This piece is rather unusual in that most of what you get to play is, although sometimes melodic, mainly for rhythmic effect. It's really important to play this part extremely accurately. You're playing with other people all the way through, and if it's not absolutely right, it's going to sound a complete mess. You may like to think about the sort of reed you'd like to use for this. It will probably be more responsive and freer than the reed you would normally use. In this piece, accuracy of articulation is much more important than beauty of sound. I suggest you start to practice this slowly with a metronome. Pick a speed at which you can play easily, which gives you time to think about what you're doing, and make sure that while you're playing the notes, you're also doing the articulation and exaggerating all the accents, because that's what gives the piece its rhythmic energy. The good news is that the part is quite repetitive, so once you've learnt a few patterns, you've basically mastered the whole piece, and all you've got to do is get it up to the speed required. Remember always to exaggerate the staccato and the accents. It will help you, particularly in the lower register, to keep your embouchure very relaxed, which will let the reed vibrate easily, and it should speak better. With the fast articulated passages, if you're able to double tongue, this will be a great opportunity to show off your skill. If not, it's just a question of practicing until your single tonguing gets fast enough. Here's an example of some of the faster articulated work. And so on. In amongst all the fast tonguing, there are odd melodies which may be familiar to you. For example, in bar 50, and then you're back to some fast tonguing again. You get another example of this melody a little later, but this time it's articulated. Watch how to articulate all the accents. When you get these melodies, make sure you make a real contrast between the big singing legato and the much spikier staccato notes you've been playing earlier. I've suggested that you practice with a metronome. You may already have spotted that in bar 82 this system falls down because there are 2 bars of 7/16. This shouldn't cause you any problems, but if you do find it a bit confusing, break the bars down to their component constituents, which are in this case 2 groups of 2 and a group of 3. So you've got 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. If this is still a problem, then a tip I heard the other day, which you might find useful, is to put words to the beats. In this case, hot dog, hamburger works extremely well and gives you the 7 beats in the bar. When you get to the Allegro vivace in bar 98, don't panic. Although it looks as if it's going to go faster, the beat actually remains the same, so the music sounds the same, and you keep playing effectively at the same speed. One of the most difficult problems in this piece is the breathing. Tan Dun has not been kind to us and hasn't given many opportunities to take a breath. There are odd places that you can snatch a quick breath, and remember always there's a neat trick that you can use one place to breathe out quickly and play a few notes and then breathe in again. This obviously doesn't take as long as doing both in one go. So to overcome some of the breathing problems in this piece, from bar 93, this is what I did to make it work in the recording. And then he thoughtfully gives you a crotchet rest where you can breathe. What you may have noticed is that I missed out some of the octave leaps. So I missed out the low D sharp in the bar of the Allegro vivace and the same note in bar 100, and then a similar place a couple of bars later. Hope that's helpful. As an example of an audition piece, I've chosen to talk to you about the Largo from Dvorak's New World Symphony. It's probably the most famous cor anglais tune there is, and it almost always crops up in auditions, so it's as well to be prepared. the face of it, the notes of this solo are extremely easy, but don't be fooled, there's nothing simple about playing it. You need to think about an awful lot of things to make it sound easy. Probably the most important thing sounds very obvious, and that's decide what speed you want to play it. I think it's important to count this solo in 4. If you start subdividing it, you risk losing the line and the legato and chopping it all up too much. Breathing is another important consideration. It's quite possible to breathe this in 4-bar phrases, but I would strongly recommend that you break it into 2-bar phrases. It's much less tiring, especially in a stressful situation, which this often is, and also you don't need to take so long over your breath. Remember also that you don't need to take a huge breath. That's counterproductive, because what you end up with is a lungful of useless air that you've got to get rid of, which all takes time. As a guide, I wouldn't normally take a bigger breath to play the first 2 bars of this than I would for a normal sentence. It's a question of using the breath properly, a little bit of air at a very high pressure, and maintaining that pressure. It can be tricky to get from the C to the E flat at the beginning because you're going over the break. If you're playing on a conservatoire instrument, you're already attached. You've got your index finger down. If you play on a thumb plate instrument, like I do, you might find it useful to put that index finger down as well. It naturally means that your fingers are over the keys for the E flat, and it's not such a jump for you. It can also improve the tone of the C, which is often a very weak note on the cor anglais. When you reach the climax of the phrase, when it gets to the forte in the last bar, make sure it really is forte. Allow the reed to sing. It's a useful analogy if you think of singing. Instead of using your vocal folds, as you would when you were singing, your reed is doing the job for you. So don't bite on it. Keep your embouchure relaxed and let the air go through the reed, and you'll get a really big full sound at the top. You'll also avoid the danger of going sharp, which you will definitely do if you bite the reed. I hope you found some of these ideas useful, and I would encourage you to take part in this wonderful project, and above all, enjoy making music, because that's what it's for.
Hello, welcome to the YouTube Symphony Orchestra Masterclasses. I'm Chiumo, and I play the clarinet in the London Symphony Orchestra. I'd like to talk to you, first of all, about the Tandon Internet Symphony, Eroica. This piece is arranged into 4 very short movements, and for the clarinet, we play mainly in the 3rd and the 4th movements. Now, in these 2 movements, it's most important to concentrate on articulation, rhythm, and accents. So I'd like to play you a couple of little bits where these things come into play. The first little excerpt is bars 32 to 35. So the important thing to note is the crescendo and the sforzando at the end, and very crisp staccato in between. The next little excerpt is from bars 51 to 54, and this is again to look at staccato and accenting. Also, as the name suggests, this piece is based on Beethoven's Eroica Symphony, and the theme from the first movement of Beethoven's Eroica is used in this piece, in its 3rd movement. The Beethoven's Eroica theme goes like this, and is played in the first movement on the clarinet with the French horn. The next section is bars 70 to 76, where Tandon has written a tune based on the Eroica theme, made it into a staccato tune, and then tagged onto the end of it a Chinese folk tune. The next thing to take note of is the transition from the 3rd movement into the 4th movement. Now, the time signature changes from 4/8 to 4/4, but in essence, the beat remains exactly the same. So this is going from bar 97. So, onto the 4th movement. Articulation, accents, and especially different staccato are very important in this section. So I'm going to play a bit from 98 to 101. And contrast this to the exact same theme played legato, where we must be very careful to phrase very beautifully and phrase in a very long line. The other things to note when playing this piece are that the tempo gradually speeds up from crotchet equals 140 through 150, 160, 170, and ends up at 180, so very fast. But when you're in each of these sections, to keep the tempo very steady. So, moving on next to what we would be looking for in an audition. I'd like to play Beethoven's Sixth Symphony from the second movement. And the most important thing to think about here is the quaver movement in the strings, because they provide the pulse over which you play the solo. And a couple of things to note about that are to make sure you do all the dynamics. So particularly, there's a subito piano in bar 76. And also, talking about the tempo again, there is a little bit of leeway to slow down at the end of bar 76. The next excerpt that I'd like to play from is Rimsky-Korsakov's Scheherazade. And this will be starting in the second movement. Now I have to change clarinets from the B flat to the A. In this excerpt, it's very important that you be as free as possible, because this is a cadenza, and so everyone is going to just listen and follow you. So the important things from that excerpt are to really take note of the markings on the page. So for example, the pause, which is very long, followed by a big diminuendo, a cellorando, and then a little rit at the end. And that happens 3 times. So moving on to the second movement, which is now for B-flat clarinet again. This is, again, a very free solo, and there's a bit of scope for rubato, but again, within a tempo framework. Now, exactly the same solo happens after letter M. But this time it's with the flute. So you can't afford to be quite as free. Of course, if you've just discussed it with the flute player, then you can do a little bit of rubato. But with so many notes to fit in such a short space of time, you have to be slightly more conservative. So perhaps a little bit like this. And the other solo I would like to talk about in the same movement, actually, is all about staccato and keeping rhythm, but also being expressive and phrasing well at the same time. And this is the solo after D, which starts after the side drum plays. So you always have to make sure that you're with the side drum, and then halfway through the solo, the second flute joins in. So again, you have to fit in with that, but also make sure that you're playing the solo role as well. Hope those little pointers were helpful to you and will become useful to you if you choose to do an audition in the near future.
Welcome to the masterclasses for the YouTube Symphony Orchestra. I'm John Stenhouse, and I've specialised in playing the bass clarinet in most of my professional career, particularly with the London Symphony Orchestra. It's the lowest instrument that's commonly used in the clarinet family. It's younger than many of the other woodwind instruments, but it's used a great deal these days. Not in classical music. It was invented towards the end of the 18th century, and there were some rather adventurous composers like Wagner, in particularly, the great writer of the Ring cycle. I'll give you an example of the sort of wonderful way in which he exploits the instrument. There are a lot of solos of that nature in the Ring. After him, Tchaikovsky is one of the most interesting composers for the instrument. He didn't write a lot, but I think most of you probably know this. Which comes from the Nutcracker Suite, familiar to most people. In an audition, you might get asked to play another piece by Tchaikovsky, which comes from one of his symphonies called the Manfred Symphony. He didn't write for it very much in the other symphonies. He wrote 4 notes, which are usually played to help out the bassoonist. But here's a bass clarinet solo in the first movement of the Manfred Symphony. That shows you the legato and quiet playing that is often exploited. The instrument used to have a range that went down as far as this. And then in order to extend the range of the instrument so that it could be used in things like military bands and so on, and school bands, they eventually extended the range like this. And there's some extra keys, and the instrument's got an extra piece on the bottom. I don't know how long it is, I ought to know how many inches, but the end of the instrument used to go to there, and now we have an extra, and I'll demonstrate the notes. That's where it used to go. And that's a bottom B flat, which is as low as the bassoon goes, so it can be used instead of the bassoon. And in many ways, the bass clarinet's probably more suitable in light music and jazz has been exploited in. People like Duke Ellington wrote wonderfully for the bass clarinet. In the Internet Symphony Eroica by Tan Dun, which we recorded recently for this project in the orchestra, there are a couple of things I'll just show you that the bass clarinet has to do. For example, when you play what we call tonguing, which is to play fast staccato, sometimes there's quite a demand to play very quickly, like this, which doesn't sound very interesting on its own, but I use a technique called double tonguing, where I go t-k, which helps speed up the process. The bass clarinet wasn't invented in the time of Beethoven's Eroica, but nevertheless, here's an example of what the bass clarinet does in that famous tune from the first movement. And here's the same sort of idea melodically, but with some of that tonguing. I do hope you found this useful and that you've got a taste for the bass clarinet. We really encourage you to take part in this wonderful new project.
Hello and welcome to the YouTube Masterclass. I'm Joost Bosdijk and I play the bassoon in the London Symphony Orchestra. I came over from Holland about 1.5 years ago to join this fantastic orchestra. I'm trying to give some ideas and tips about the piece you're going to play for the YouTube Symphony Orchestra, which is called the Eroica Internet Symphony by Tan Dun. I came across this piece about 3 weeks ago when we recorded it with the orchestra, and I must say it was really good fun. He worked with us and it was really a very interesting piece to play. It's probably called Eroica Symphony because there is some very obvious thematic material from the Eroica Symphony of Beethoven. If you don't know the piece, one of the main themes goes like this. It would be a very good idea if you prepare a piece like this to listen to a recording of the Eroica Symphony. And because it's very famous, you won't have trouble to find it. It will help you to understand the music even better. But if I play a piece like this, the first thing I do is to try to see what can you do with that sort of phrase. I like to make it a really nice and melodic theme rather than a very short patch. So it's about 4 bars, and you try to make it as if you just talk in one sentence, and then you don't have to interrupt at all. So it would be rather that than if you can try to do that, you will immediately impress the people very much in your audition video. I think this theme comes back quite a few times and not always in the same way, because the way I played it now was a really melodic way of playing it. But a few bars later, you can see that it's suddenly sounding like this. So it's a completely different world. One of the things about music is that you really make very clear differences. If I talk and if I would be angry, I would suddenly talk like this and I would start moving my hands. And if I want to be really, really sort of nice and gentle, I would probably talk a bit quieter. And so what you want to do is make a huge difference. So you have the theme like this, which is a really polite theme. And then you make the contrast and you play. When I had my lessons in conservatory, I studied actually in Holland and also in Germany. One of my teachers said, like, to prepare an audition, because it's quite sometimes a stressful thing. It is great to do it somehow because you really challenge yourself, but you have to think about it as if you're going to rob the bank. You shouldn't leave anything up to chance, because it's as soon as you have thought about every possibility, about everything that can happen, you will never be surprised in a stressful situation, and actually you are much more capable of handling it. I thought that was a tremendously helpful suggestion because I started to prepare things much better and much more thorough than I'd done before. And the fact that I'm now in the London Symphony Orchestra means that I've done a very successful audition with a lot of competition. That's the other thing about auditions. You have a lot of competition, but you shouldn't think about it as competition because actually it doesn't really matter what other people really think of you. It actually matters much more what you want to tell people with your instrument. And as soon as you really understand that, it will be so much more easy to play your instrument. In a way, it doesn't really, people will always have an idea about it, and some people will like it, other people won't like it. As long as you really like it yourself, then you have actually done a very successful performance, I think. And of course, you can listen to tips from people and suggestions, but in general, it's you who have to do it and not somebody else. So don't get nervous about playing it. It's just your thing, and you have to make it happen and have fun with music. Because I think music is a really, really interesting thing. You can express so many things about music, but also about yourself without actually having to put it into words. And most musicians are not fantastic at putting things into words because they rather put their emotions into their instrument. Having said that, one of the fantastic symphonies by Tchaikovsky is really inspired by emotions. It's his last symphony, it's the Pathétique. It's a fantastic piece to play. I've done it a few times now, and it's always really gets me because it's such an emotional piece. He wrote it in a time that he was emotionally in a very low situation. He was very depressed, and he actually wrote this all in the symphony. And in the last movement, when all the emotions start getting really intense, he wrote this fantastic melody for the bassoons and the flute. And I'll try to play a bit for you, like from that piece. It's very often asked for in auditions, and I think you can just put so much into it that it's a fantastic thing to play. It is a very long phrase to play, and you need quite a bit of stamina and practice to do it, but it's so rewarding because it's really fantastically written for the bassoon, although it's not the low register that people always pick up on for the bassoon, like the grumpy old grandfather. It should never be aggressive, I think, unless it's really written in the music, but you try to sing in your instrument. Actually, just the phrase after the phrase I just played is for two bassoons only, and it's actually shows, it starts in the upper register and goes all the way down. And I think Tchaikovsky really knew about the instrument, and this fragment sounds like this. So this actually shows basically the whole range of the bassoon, just this last movement of Tchaikovsky. And if you haven't heard the piece, I think you really should listen to it because it's fantastic music. If you know it, try to play it once because it's fantastic to play as well. Well, I hope you got something out of this and you will have the courage, and I actually do encourage you to play for the audition tape, and wish you all good luck with it.
Hello YouTube, and welcome to the masterclasses for the YouTube Symphony Orchestra. I'm Dominic Morgan, and I'm the principal contrabassoon player for the London Symphony Orchestra. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how to audition successfully. I hope that you'll take part in this fantastic project, and maybe some of these tips will help. We always try and present ourselves when auditioning, present ourselves with confidence, and never apologise, no matter how bad we might be feeling. And what we're looking for really is, first and foremost, a really good sound, which on the contrabassoon is a big, rich, well-rounded and complex sound. And then after that, we're really looking for accuracy in both technically and rhythmically, good intonation and a good range of dynamics. You might like to present some of this Tan-Dun symphony, which from a contrabassoon point of view it's technically quite difficult. From bars 77 to 91, it's difficult because it's quick and the notes are repeated quickly, and it starts quite high, but it jumps around and ends up quite low, and it's quite difficult to get the notes to speak, jumping from one register to another, and the low notes are difficult to speak at that speed. And it's well worth practicing this slowly and gradually building up the tempo. A good audition piece, as most of the repertoire of the contrabassoon, unfortunately, is still in copyright, and we can't use it. Things like Ravel and Strauss and Mahler, it's all still in copyright. So the Brahms St. Anthony Variations has quite an important contrabassoon part, which really does demonstrate whether we can make a good sound, play in tune, and play with a good range of dynamics. So we would use the theme and the Variation 6. I'll play, first of all, the theme. And a Variation 6, which is more technically difficult, shows that we have a good mastery of getting around the instrument and a good dynamic range. There is one particularly tricky bar, which is 11 bars before the end, where we have to get down to a bottom C quickly. And it helps to achieve this to finger some of the bottom C from the beginning of the bar. So we're already prepared. So instead of playing the high C just with the 3 fingers of the left hand, we also add the C with the thumb, which gives us much greater ability to get down to the bottom C cleanly, as we're already prepared for it. Hopefully you found this masterclass useful, and I do hope you'll participate in this wonderful project. And please do get down and practice and record an audition piece and upload it to YouTube. Thank you very much.
Hello and welcome to the LSO Masterclass for the YouTube Symphony Orchestra. I'm playing the trumpet with Nigel Gomm on my left here. My name's Maurice Murphy, and we'd like to start with a little bit of something from the Internet Symphony Eroica. The beginning of the piece, we have a few bars tacit, then a little solo for the trumpet, which I'll try and play for you now.
When we did the sessions for this, we played it 30 times, and it was perfect every time, including the first one. But what's always intrigued me about you is, how do you know how to play that tune? Because it doesn't really say anything, you just play it, and it just sounds beautiful and perfect.
Well,
so when you see that, what do you think?
Well, I just look at it and try and sort out the phrasing, and depending on what the conductor wants with the volume and such like, I look at that as that strikes me as a piece of music which
because
you find on a film score.
Lots of people would look at that and go, which means nothing.
Which means nothing, yeah.
So, and you have this ability, which you're famous for, your whole career, of playing a tune like that, like you just did.
Oh.
And that's, are you singing it? Do you think it is?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's what I think
yeah.
you do. Yeah.
Just phrasing.
So
when I was young, I was one of my little old teachers. He used to teach me to play slow melodies, and I always had to learn the words. If you didn't know the words, you couldn't play the tune.
Okay.
So you look at phrasing everything.
That makes sense, because for those of you that are going to pick the first trumpet part, or most of you will probably play that tune, what we don't want to hear is just right notes in a line. What
That's
Maurice
right.
played then is far, far more than that. And as a tip to anybody, you can do auditions for symphony orchestras, auditions for anything. You can play the fastest, flashiest piece in the world, and it won't get you the job. What gets you the job is the sound you make and the way you play a tune. The other thing about that is it's in a horrible key for the trumpet, and that's perfectly,
nice.
that's beautifully in tune. So that's the other thing to watch. It is a very sharp key, which means there's sharp notes and flat notes in there for the trumpet, and you know.
And you have to use the.
And you have to use the.
You have to compensate with
the slides.
The slides.
And the biggest tip is, as Maurice said, sing it. Sing the phrase before you play it, and then try and make it sound how you'd sing.
And for a start, I mean, there's only one dynamic in that. It's just marked as MF, but they said it's a solo, so you play it out a little. And even though there's only one crescendo in the last bar, you have to put little waves
the
in
phrases.
Yeah.
Yeah. Buzz me a few notes on your mouthpiece.
Buzz you a few notes?
Yeah, just take your mouthpiece out and buzz a few notes. Yeah, see, People always ask me, I've been a friend and a colleague of Maurice's for a long, long time. I used to be his next door neighbour before we worked together. And I've had the privilege of sitting there for 20 years in this orchestra with him. And people always ask me, how does Maurice do this? And it's no good asking Maurice because he doesn't know. True? True. But people often ask me, and I've listened and listened and listened. And when Maurice plays the mouthpiece, you hardly hear any air. Not so much buzz on the mouthpieces when we practice, and I'm sort of that side of things where there's lots of air and not a lot of sound. When Maurice buzzes it, it's all sound. And as he says, he's not physically the fittest. He's never been to a gym, never worked out, and yet he can play that phrase. And the answer is because his lips and his breathing is so efficient that everything that goes to the mouthpiece is sound. There's not much wasted air. And a very, very good thing to practice when you're playing long phrases is to play it on the mouthpiece and try and get rid of the part of the sound and concentrate on the so you get the most buzz that you can.
Yeah. And I think a lot of it is in the breathing.
Yeah,
in
absolutely.
the breathing. I think so many people just breathe off the top of the lungs, whereas I was taught to breathe down, right down there, and press.
Yeah, use the diaphragm.
Use the diaphragm. Yeah.
One of the problems recording this is it's very heavily scored. It's very big scoring, and there's apart from, after the beautiful tune, there's like little fanfare accompaniment things which normally we were playing a good healthy forte, but the composer wanted more and more and more, and this actually becomes a problem, especially on the lower parts. So anybody auditioning on one of the second or third trumpet parts needs to learn to really, really dig out the low notes. And the same with the first one. Should we just do a bit of...
Yeah.
Just do that, 3 bars at...
Let's see.
3 bars at, wherever it is, 80, 70. So those low notes need to be louder than marked, and actually, although musically it's wrong, that needs to be the loudest part of the bar each time, because that's what was asked for. As I say, it's a massive orchestration around it. Otherwise, it never gets heard. That's the biggest problem, actually, in all 3 parts after the tune, just getting those rhythms through. So when you're recording this, try and play as clearly as you can on those. And the same for the tongue figures. What we want to hear is really good articulation. Maurice.
Okay.
Tell me about this piece.
Tell you about this piece.
Why did you pick to do this piece?
Because it's nice and tuneful.
Yeah.
It's not too hard for the students. It was edited by a French trumpet player, Roger Voisin, for C trumpet.
Right.
But we are mostly, in England, we are mostly B-flat players. And I find that it sits very, very nicely on the Piccolo A.
Okay. The thing with this project and the piece you choose is the brief it has to be a piece before copyright, which on the trumpet is is a bit of a problem because the B-flat trumpet, which is the one we all use in the orchestra most of the time, certainly in Britain, or maybe a C trumpet, which is similar, just a tiny bit smaller, wasn't really around before that time. So the pieces weren't written for this instrument, and this is actually the instrument we would like to hear. Now, if you do use a smaller trumpet, like a piccolo trumpet, my opinion would be that we're not looking for somebody who can play Brandenburg 2, which is incredibly high, or people running around doing pyrotechnics on a piccolo trumpet. What we're looking for is the same thing as I said about the Maurice's tune that you played earlier, is what we're looking for is a sound and playing a musical phrase. Now, you know, that's a beautiful big sound for a piccolo trumpet. That's quite hard to achieve in itself. So if you do go down the road of playing a smaller trumpet, which many of you will, I mean, the Haydn trumpet concerto, the Hummel trumpet concerto are obvious choices of the older things. If you do play on a smaller trumpet, we're still looking, it's the sound and the quality of the sound that we're looking for.
Well, I hope you've enjoyed this little session that we've had, and hope it be useful for you in the future. And in the meantime, keep listening to all different styles, not just symphonic styles, but jazz styles, big bands, anything at all. And you can learn a lot. I'm 73 and I'm still learning. Cheers.
Hello and welcome to the Horn Masterclass for the YouTube Symphony Orchestra. My name's David Pyatt and I'm Principal Horn of the London Symphony. Today I'd like to talk to you about auditions on camera for the YouTube Symphony. And I'm going to start with a couple of basic points for you to think about. First of all, there's three things we tend to look for in an audition situation. There's accuracy of pitch and rhythm, absolutely vitally important. All the time thinking about the beat, all the time, never let that go. The second thing we're interested in is musicality. If you can portray something of yourself and give us an idea of what you're like as a person, then if that can come over on the film, that would be fantastic. The third thing we're looking for is a bit harder to really put our fingers on. It's the inflection in what you play. It's the direction that you give the music, within the confines of the rhythm, of course, but always thinking about what this music means to you and how you can put your personality into that. Okay, having said that, let's talk about the Internet Symphony Eroica by Tan Dun. This first horn part is quite a big blow, so if you have a chance to use a bumper, then do so, obviously not on the audition tape. I'm going to play you the first big tune which comes in the horn part. The trumpet comes in first, so be aware of the pitch and his relative intonation to you. And when you start, think about trying to make a kind of a film sound. So big and broad, and especially in the low register, keep the air flowing the whole time. It's quite low for a first horn. And allow the music to phrase off naturally towards the end. The second element, which is very obviously an issue in this piece, is glissandos from the highest notes. When we recorded it, we tried it two ways. We tried it actually starting on a B, which is in the home key of the piece, and we also tried it from the highest note. What I want people to try and do is to use as much diaphragm for this as possible. Don't just do it here because you'll end up bruising yourself and getting into a terrible state. So try and use the diaphragm to produce a loud glissando. That kind of thing. Not the most beautiful effect, but quite effective. The next section, which is worth talking about, starts in bar 93. And again, this is very low writing for a high horn player. But the other thing that's very important about it is the rhythm. Do make sure you've got that going on the whole time. And we're back into the main theme again. This section, you will see from the part, has four increasing tempo markings, starting at 140 and building up to 170. Make sure you take these into account when you're recording this. It's very hard to have a metronome there and change it, so you're going to have to lock in your head for the tempos. The final section has more of the glissandos I talked about earlier, and a very, very hard ending, which involves trilling on a pedal B with a 2-octave glissando. That kind of thing. I seem to remember when we recorded it, we actually split, hate to use that word, sorry, split the low B between the low horns and the high horns. So in effect, we could do this and come back in on the glissando. However, you're going to have to play the whole thing. So that's Tan Dun Symphony Eroica for the internet. Thank you. So I'd like to take you through the first page of Mozart's Fourth Horn Concerto First Movement, which is a standard orchestral audition piece and familiar, I'm sure, to the vast majority of horn players. The first entry that you play, think of this as adding a voice to the texture. So if you have a pianist, don't feel you have to come in. It's not your big solo moment, not yet. So come in fairly gentle, adding this voice to the texture. And the solo starts properly there. Make sure that you count these bars rests. When there's 2 or 3 or maybe even 4 bars, count them out. Because, as I said earlier, one of the things we're going to be looking for more than anything else is rhythm and accuracy in counting. It's very off-putting if someone comes crashing in on the 4th and a half beat when you're not expecting them. Okay, the next section is your first big solo, so enjoy it. Take the time to breathe really well before you start, and also think about the use of your air column, keeping it a nice steady airflow the whole time. Now here, be very careful to resist the temptation to rush. Give yourself plenty of time for the semiquavers. It's not as fast as you think. And here, make sure you keep the subdivision going in your head the whole time. Imagine you've got a string section behind you going, because one of the hardest things to do is to play long notes in time. Okay, the next section is the minor section. It's lovely to be able to stretch this and to take time on it, but again, in an audition situation, rhythm is king. So if you're going to do rubato, it has to be within a bar. So you can go dee da 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 da, so long as that downbeat is in the right place. Now, the trills. The most normal problem that people have with these is actually trying to play them too fast. So you get this kind of relax. Almost think about semiquavers when you're playing these. And now think, where is this music going? The final bit I'm going to play you is the introduction to the recapitulation. Having said all I said about rhythm, this couple of bars you can actually afford to take a little bit of space and time it, the whole thing. And you're back into the tune again. I hope you found this session useful, and I look forward very much to seeing your videos. Thank you.
Welcome to the YouTube Symphony Orchestra Trombone Masterclass. I'm Dudley Bright, Principal Trombone of the London Symphony Orchestra. I've chosen to talk about Davies' Concerto for Trombone, which you've just heard the opening from. This music contains tests in technique, facility, range, rhythm, and expressive ability. And all these you need if you're going to perform in Tan Dun's piece. We have provided one version for you to look at, as there are so many different editions of this with different articulations and rhythms. One of the problems is the exact rhythm of the opening and its repetition. Don't focus on the precise value of the small note, but think of the phrase in itself. Think of this phrasing each time that motive comes, and use slight expressive variations. Let's go on to the next phrase. It's quite a difficult passage to play really lyrically. Remember to keep the breath moving and avoid closing the throat. Listen carefully and don't allow unsightly bulges to spoil the sound. You'll alternate fifth position to aid the legato onto the B flat, but don't forget to sharpen it slightly as it's slightly flat in a legit fifth position. It's like this. And don't try and play this passage too softly. You're still the soloist. Just contrast with the opening. This piece requires good slide technique. So, the slide technique often covers quite large distances. You need to do that without disturbing the line of the music. Use alternate positions to avoid constant changes of direction of the slide. Move the slide as fast as possible. Don't grip or jerk, but absorb the energy in relaxed fingers. Now we come on to a beautiful lyrical passage. Keep it simple with subtle colouring of intensity and freely flowing rhythm. Listen carefully to avoid unattractive bulges in the phrase. If you keep the breath steady and avoid movement of the embouchure, it should be possible to play this with very little tongue and a nice soft legato. You can also use a little tasteful vibrato on the long notes, but make sure it doesn't change the character of the sound. Let's take a look at the last couple of bars. The slur down from the top B flat isn't easy to make it sound good. Listen critically to avoid bulges and keep the breath steady with a minimum of lip movement. Then in the next bar we have the slur with the staccato underneath it. Try using an articulation with a kind of ha, 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 ha. And let's put it together. There's a few issues nearer the ends of the piece. Notice how the alternate first positions in the second bar there. Let me show you again slowly and notice how important it is to have subtle tuning alterations. So the fourth position, alternate positions, really help there. Now let's come on to the trills at the end. This creates a problem for some people. And in various editions, there's different rhythms and slight different versions, but I'm just using the simple trill. If you have problems with trills, try starting very slowly. Make sure there's no movement of the jaw. Make sure there's no movement of the tongue. Keep the throat open and keep the air flowing, and then gradually speed it up. And when you come to a point where you can't really trill any faster just using the embouchure, just use the ever such slight movement of the jaw, like this. So there we have it, Davies' concertino for trombone. I'd just like to finish up with playing the last section again. Well, I hope you've enjoyed those few thoughts about that music and that you will enjoy making a great performance for the YouTube Symphony Orchestra. Thank you.
Hello YouTube, and welcome to the Bass Trombone Masterclass for the YouTube Symphony Orchestra. My name is Paul Milner. I play the principal bass trombone with the London Symphony Orchestra. I'm here today to talk to you about the couple of pieces that you might wish to play for the YouTube Symphony Orchestra edition. I'm now going to play the Sarabande from Suite Number 5 by Bach. Just before I start, I'll just say a few things about it. If you can listen to cellists or recordings of this piece, it would help. Not to get a definitive version, there isn't one. It's the main thing is just making it musical, making sure that you kind of make it flow and that you get a good sound, good tone throughout the whole instrument. Especially when there's the jumps as well. That's the hard bit. When you're choosing the music, if you are going to play this piece, Just be aware that there is two versions of this. There's a version for the cello that's called the scordatura, and that's with the top string, I think, the A string, tuned down to a G. So now, if you play that, it will sound all wrong. So make sure that you've got the proper version. So that's all there is to say about it, really. Just make it flow, make sure that you listen to someone doing it, so that you can actually watch the phrasing marks. As I said, there's several different versions of this with different phrasing, but as long as it sounds musical and you get the breathing and it doesn't halt up the line, that's the main thing. So one of the hardest bits of the Bach is the wide leaps in it. They are marked in my version to be slurred, but I think it's fairly impossible. As I said, I listened to one of my colleagues in the London Symphony Orchestra playing the cello, and the leaps on the strings are quite big as well, and it's not easy to slur them all the way. What you can do, just to make sure that you can get the leaps up and down, is I'll take it back to B flat major again, because that's, as I said, the easiest one to do. And you can just do this. Just start with one octave first, and then you can do 2 octaves. Bit like that. And if you keep practicing things like that, and you can do them throughout all the scales, I don't know whether you practice them in thirds and in fourths, but it's a good idea to do that. Know your scales, and you can do the intervals, and that will help with, when you have to come to play this kind of piece. Okay, and so on to number 26 of Haydn's Creation, the famous bass trombone excerpt. It's quite tricky to play. It needs to be really, really bouncy, a light kind of thing. You've got to remember that you're the bass of the orchestra, but you're also accompanying the chorus. One thing to do with this and any other kind of famous kind of bass trombone part, solo bits, like Beethoven 9, is try to get hold of the score and look at the words so that you're not going to breathe when there should be a slur over the words. The breathing is quite difficult in this, and it's found in lots and lots and lots of excerpts and in orchestral pieces, solo pieces. It's just kind of taking quick snatch breaths so that you keep topping up. Don't let your breath go too empty. It's like a petrol tank. Don't run it onto the reserve and then have to fill up lots and lots, because that takes too much time. So if you can just keep topping it up. So it's just a bit like this. So I played that scale and I filled up at the same time. So if you can do that as you're playing, that keeps you, topped up, and you don't take too long to breathe. Now the speed that I'm going to play this at is probably a fairly good general speed. It's marked vivace, but conductors are all different. For an addition, probably the speed that I take is a fairly safe bet, but do practice at all speeds, especially faster speeds. There's William Tell as well, there's Rossini's Thieving Magpie, all those kind of things you can practice and you can play for an addition, and then you get into the symphony orchestra and the conductor starts off a little bit faster than you were expecting and a little bit faster than you've actually rehearsed and practiced, and you're absolutely lost, basically. So make sure that you practice it a lot faster as well. So I'll now play Haydn's Creation, number 26 for you. I'm now going to talk about the piece by Tan Dun that the YouTube Symphony Orchestra is going to be playing. There's a few rhythmic passages in it, and you just have to make sure that you be really, really careful with them. When you're playing in octaves with the tuba, just make sure that you sit on top of the tuba's bass sound. Don't try and play too loud. There's a fortissimo passage later on that could be very, very much in danger of being too loud. So just make sure that you concentrate on the sound. So the last few bars of the Internet Symphony are really quite difficult. They've got a jump of 2 octaves from low B up to high B. It's quite difficult, and there's also a glissando. One way that you can maybe work up to it is take away the B major aspect of it, because that's quite difficult in the first place. But go back to B flat major, which is the general kind of scale that we all learn. And when you're playing the first octave, use your tongue. And then when you go onto the second octave, take the tongue away and use breath attack, diaphragm attack, whatever you wish to call it, air, no tongue. So I'll just play that now. So there was no tongue in that, and that means that the tongue's not getting in the way of actually trying to play those high notes. So now I'll demonstrate those last few bars. The first bar is a trill on the plug there, on the first trigger. It's not exactly the right note, but it's as close as you're going to get to it. You've then got to go all the way up to a note, which it says in the music, as high as possible. What I did was I decided to aim for the B. So you've got that note in your mind before you then jump down 2 octaves, and then you've got to try and get back up there again. So rhythm, accuracy of the rhythm, making sure that you get some of the tricky passages sorted out, and the sound quality, making sure that it's just really, really nice.
Hello, welcome to YouTube and welcome to the LSO Masterclass for the Internet Symphony Eroica. My name's Patrick Howard and I play the tuba in the LSO, and I'm going to take you bar by bar through any of the problems that I foresee you want to consider before you present yourself to us in your audition. So the first thing to remember is you play a brass instrument, you've got to remember to blow it, and you must remember that the sign staccato doesn't mean the shortest note that you can possibly play. So if you look at bar 6, I beg your pardon, bar 6, you see these notes, 3, 4, and as you can tell very clearly, they sound very rude, very dry, and pitchless. Now we have to find a way of making notes that are marked staccato still have pitch. So put them first of all on the beat like this, 3, 4. And now off a beat, 3, 4. They're still separate, they're still rhythmic, and they're still audible in terms of pitch. The next thing you need to consider is that, for example, at 21, you no longer play at the same time as the trombone section. You play one quaver before them, and you really must make sure that the notes you play are absolutely precisely in time, because you need to go bar, and they go 3, 4, bam, bagadum, bam, bagadum. And if they wait for you to play, the whole thing will collapse. So be very careful from bar 21 to make sure that your entry on the downbeat and your entry on the downbeat of bar 23 and your entry on the downbeat of bar 25 is extremely precise. Most of the problems of playing a piece like this for a tuba player are really to do with playing in time and in tune with a good sound with other people. You don't have solos to play normally, but you do have an important function as part of the harmony and the rhythm of the group. And you must never forget it, otherwise you undermine everybody else. Again, be careful. The 7th bar of the Allegro, you've got a staccato quaver. It's part of an E major triad. We must hear the E, not just a dry, nasty noise. Be careful of the rhythm and bar 57, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, bar 63 it must be, where you go 3, 4, 1, bum, 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 bum. Don't get faster as you crescendo, don't get slower as you diminuendo. You probably need to double tongue the very smallest notes. So let me now play the rhythm of the bar I'm talking about. I'll give you the tempo. 1, 2, 3, 4. And now with the crescendo. 3, 4. Be very careful about the next entry at figure 7. It's a semitone higher than the B natural you ended on. Count very carefully and make sure your first entry is clearly articulated and bang in time. It's very easy if you do that and much harder if you don't. 86, 87, 88, 89, 90. There's a very high note at 90. Relax because you've already played it an octave lower in the previous bars. If you're worried about it, just practice playing octave E's. And until you're good at that, don't attempt to play what's written. Because it'll be hard. But if you do the preparation first of all, you can make it extremely easy. And so it goes on. Be careful at 127. If you studiously observe the phrasing from a C natural, a dotted minim, fortissimo, slurred down to a B and then slurred to an A, you'll probably run out of air just at the point where the bass trombone and in fact the whole trombone section are relying on you. So I would change the phrasing and I would put a breath at the end of the dotted minim so that I can prepare a breath before the B natural and then go down into the E. Again, very, very simple thing to do. So really precisely articulated 130, 131, 132, 133, 134, 135, and 136. Now, if we look at the next thing that might make you feel uncomfortable and shouldn't, you have a trill at 143. The musician inside you says play a whole tone trill so that we play E to F sharp. The pragmatist inside me says don't do that. Play a semitone trill and practice it carefully. Like this, a tempo, 1, 2, 3. Not, because you're unlikely to get it even as cleanly as that. So a semitone trill, almost certainly. A big wallop at 143, subito piano, and my recommendation is you leave the crescendo and the journey up to the note marked as high as possible, as late as possible. It's very fast, but there's a pause. So let me give you what I imagine the tempo might be. 1, 2. Now, those of you who've got perfect pitch will find it difficult to work out what note I played, and I'll be very honest with you, I didn't play a note. I sang it. It says here, play as high as possible. So you can play any note you like, and in the very top register of the instrument, sounds rather good. And rather better than, actually that was sung too, I can't get out of the habit of singing. And that's not terribly high, and it certainly doesn't sound very high. So on the recording we made, that's what I did. As I say, it's all about playing intensely rhythmically, really trying to play in a way that always establishes pitch, regardless of accents and dots and lines and any editorial marks. The brass section need you to lay down a pitch which they can relate to, which they can sit on. That doesn't mean you don't play short, it means you don't think that a short note is an inaudible grunt. It needs to have pitch. Organize your breathing. I've been playing the tuba for years and years and years, and my most useful asset is a pencil. And if I'm in any doubt about where I'm going to breathe, I mark it. And I try to mark breaths in a way that will add to the possibility of playing good music rather than just to sort out me being old and tired. You have an audition piece to play. It does need to be something which is not in copyright. Now that produces real problems for us because the repertoire for the tuba, the solo repertoire for the tuba that is, doesn't really exist until the 1950s. And of course, if it's 1950s, it's in copyright. And you'd be bankrupting your family and the whole project if you went down that path. So I stole a minuet from the first cello suite of Bach, and I tried to play that on the tuba. There's a whole host of music like that. Don't try and play stolen music as if you're a cellist or a flute player or a clarinetist, but do have a listen to the way a clarinetist or a flute player might play it, and have a look at the different editions, so that although you're not trying to be that instrumentalist, you are using your musical imagination to see how a good player might have played it on the original instrument. I hope those thoughts are some use to you, and I hope you have a fantastic time in this project. Thanks very much.
Hello YouTube, welcome to the masterclasses for the YouTube Symphony Orchestra. My name is Nigel Thomas, I'm timpanist in the London Symphony Orchestra, and I'm here to try and give you a little insight into what it is and what's involved in playing timpani in a symphony orchestra, specifically in relation to the Internet Symphony Eroica written by Tan Dun. Playing timpani in a symphony orchestra is a great privilege, and it's also great fun and a pretty big responsibility, one I'm sure many of you will have experienced already. If there's one piece of advice I'd give to anybody who plays timpani and who wants to learn the subtleties of what's involved in playing, I would say the biggest thing to always bear in mind is to keep your ears open. Big ears is very important. The timpanist in an orchestra, I often think of as being like the glue holding the orchestra together. We have to be subtle, we have to be chameleon-like, joining all the elements of the orchestra together, and also to be effectively the drummer in the band. We are the rhythm section, the timpanists, with the bass and drums together, and everyone relies on us and listens to us often to hold the whole show together. And this applies very much in the Symphony Eroica. If I can just demonstrate a few bits. Very early on in bar 8, is a very, very loud section there. There aren't many times in your career as a timpanist where you'll be required to play pretty much as loud as you can. You know, there's great power at our disposal here, and it should be used sparingly. But I think in this one instance in bar 8, you really should give it probably everything you can, especially as the composer asked me to do that the other day when we recorded it. So I demonstrate playing very loudly. I think I probably should, don't you? You really can give it everything. maybe even more than that if you like. Whatever the conductor asks you for, you've got to give it. And but there are also very subtle sections in the piece as well. There are sections involving pedaling the drums, which is something that I'm sure you will have come across in certain pieces of repertoire. In this, just as a piece of advice, the implication by the composer is that you should pedal the two middle drums to get around the notes that he's asked you to play. My advice to you is just pedal between C sharp, C natural and B on one drum, on the third drum up. Let me demonstrate the Allegro vivace at the end in bar 98. I play like this. So effectively you're changing all of the notes just on the one drum, and that applies through the whole piece. So that's my advice to you when preparing this. Other bits of advice when preparing to audition for this: make sure you know your drums intimately. Make sure you've worked out everything you're going to do in advance, i.e. Which notes you're going to put on which drums. Choose your sticks very carefully as well. The composer asked me for the sticks on the hard side of medium. These are pretty hard, and you need that to cut through the orchestra in this particular piece. And again, always bear in mind, ears wide open is absolutely vital. The section, the Dolce Molto section at bar 9 with the trumpet solo. There's no point in me demonstrating it without the trumpet player being here, but you've got to listen very carefully to the trumpets and fit in with what they're doing when they're pulling the tempo around. Make sure that you follow them. And the rest of it is just pretty technical. Make sure you know what hand you're starting certain section with. For instance, in bar 90, if you're playing the English stroke American method of timpani, start with your right hand. Just make sure you've got everything planned out so you know exactly what you're going to do when it comes to the big moment, because you're going to be nervous, and the more you have under your belt and at your disposal, and the more you've thought through carefully, stay calm and just play and make music. The other piece I'd like you to prepare, if you would, is Beethoven's 8th Symphony. And there are 3 sections I'd like you to prepare for this. The very opening of the symphony, where you're playing tutti with the rest of the orchestra. Check your tuning. A conductor might ask you for dampers on the drums. I'll just put them on now. I wouldn't necessarily do this in a concert, but just for demonstration now I'll use them. And if you don't know this piece, get a CD, listen to it, and you're making music with the orchestra. First section up to letter A. Second bit I'd like you to play for me, please, is letter B. Tutti again. And the section 7 bars later. And finally, at the very end of the symphony, the last movement, I'd like you to play, if you would, from bar 469, which is octave Fs. I'll put dampers on again just so you can hear clearly what I'm doing. Bar 469. The reason I've chosen Beethoven 8 as the other audition piece is that it's many people have said if you can play Beethoven on the timpani, you can play anything, and I think there's a lot of truth in that. It requires of you every skill you're going to need as a timpanist: musical, technical, interpretation, subtlety, touch, tone, colour, everything. And the opening of the symphony is just to make sure you know the phrasing, understand the way the orchestra will phrase that section, and just a general test of your musicianship. And at the end of the symphony, it's just basically a technical exercise to check you can double stick cleanly, and which is a prerequisite of being able to play the timpani well. Precision, tuning, everything. It's just a good test, Beethoven. So good luck, and hopefully you found this little talk useful, and it'll encourage you all to participate in what is a wonderful project. So good luck. Thank you.
Hello YouTube, welcome to the masterclasses for the YouTube Symphony Orchestra. My name's Neil Percy, and as you can see, I have some rather exotic instruments here that are from automobiles. But the fantastic Tandon has written his Internet Symphony, and he's actually using these instruments. So I'm going to play a few things from the very opening of the piece, and hopefully you'll be able to play along too. So as you see, we actually have some brake gongs here that are wheel rims. And if we go to bar 4 of the piece, the second half of the bar, we have something like this. We can hear that ringing on. At the same time that that's happening, we have another player who's playing what are effectively brake discs from your everyday automobile. They're playing pretty much the same rhythmic figure. Here we go. Bar 4, second half of the bar. So there you have it. These two wonderfully exotic instruments playing at the same time. I guess you could get any piece of metal as long as you can get it roughly to the same pitch and play along with this. I hope you do and have some fun. So we've had those incredibly exotic instruments, and now we have a more conventional instrument that you might see in your everyday percussion section. This is a marimba, and all marimbas are made from wood. The notes are wooden. So at the same time that we just heard the car parts there, the marimba's got this figure. So you can see that they're roughly playing in unison. When you play in unison, it means that all the parts play the same line. A little bit later on in the second half of the piece, we've got this rather famous tune. So if it is that you don't actually have a marimba, but you still want to play along, you could probably do it on a xylophone, which is a smaller instrument and something that your school band might own. Maybe just use soft sticks though, and it will sound really good. So we've changed instruments again. Here we are with the vibraphone, which is one of my favourite instruments. As you can see, it looks a little bit like the marimba, but this time the notes are made of metal. So they're able to ring a little bit more, and you get a beautiful sustaining sound. And it'll ring all by itself. Now, when you play the vibraphone with the marimba, it makes a really nice sound, makes a really nice, beautiful ringing sound. So again, at the beginning, the vibraphone plays in unison with the marimba and the automobile parts we heard earlier on. It's the same figure, second half of bar 4. Now again, once you've downloaded the parts, you YouTubers, what you'll be able to do is, if you don't have a vibraphone, maybe you might want to use a glockenspiel. Lots of school bands and orchestras and things like that will definitely have a glockenspiel. So definitely play the vibe part on the glockenspiel. It'll work really well. Later on in the piece, the second half, again, in unison with the marimba, it plays that well-known tune. So, to the audition piece, and it'd be really fantastic if you can upload your videos to show me how you play the next piece we're going to talk about. And it's the last movement of a very famous piece by Rimsky-Korsakov called Scheherazade. Now, we actually played this piece last night over at the Barbican Centre with the London Symphony Orchestra. Now, it's a very famous test piece, very famous audition piece, and I just wanted to speak about the last movement in particular. Now, the thing for me is that what you have to do is play a supporting role to the trumpets, because a lot of the material that you have actually supports the trumpet. So if we go to letter C, we have this figure. Now, at the same time as us playing that, the trumpets are playing this. You can hear that triplet figure really distinctly. Dum da 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 dum da 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 dum da 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 dum pa dum pa dum. So our actual snare drum part actually just underpins that. And I think the most important thing is to think in triplets. So therefore, in the roll, I'm actually playing a triplet hand speed roll. So I'm playing this. So that everything should fit together. I'll just play it again. A little bit later on, we've got a sforzando piano roll. Now, I see a lot of young players, when they go from very loud to very quiet, their hands stop working, and we sometimes get things like this happening. And nothing actually happens. The most important thing with sforzando piano roll is to keep the hands moving. And I promise you it'll sound good. Something like this. Okay, so I'll just play the sforzando piano roll again. Keep the hands moving when you go into the piano section. Now again, in those rolls, I'm actually putting quite a lot into the drum. I think one of the most important things about whatever instrument you play is to have an idea of the sound you want to make before you actually play it. If there's a sound in your head, very often you can recreate that sound. If there's actually nothing in your head at all before you play, it can be very difficult to actually come in with a sound that you want to make. So, listen to lots of records, go and hear your favourite players play. Once you've come up with a sound that you really like, try and emulate it. It's getting that sound in your head. I think it's really, really important. And again, it's understanding where you might want the snare drum to fit in the balance of the orchestra. It's very easy for the snare drum to dominate because it is such a dominating instrument. But for me, I think it's more about blending, particularly when you're with 80, 85, 90 fellow musicians. It can't always dominate. Sometimes, and very, very much of the time, it has to blend. Now, if we move on to, I believe it's letter P, we've got this figure. Now, again, that is supposed to blend with the rest of the orchestra. Everybody else is playing that rhythmic figure. But with those drags, as you know, that little rhythmic thing is called a drag. It's two notes followed by the main note. It's sort of two grace notes followed by the main notes. And we really need to hear those two notes. We don't want it to be sloppy like this. We want to hear those two notes. So make sure when you're practicing that you can always hear those two notes. Rimsky-Korsakov was incredibly specific about making sure that whether it's two notes, three notes, four notes, all of those things must be observed. And remember, lots of Russian composers after Rimsky-Korsakov, like Stravinsky, Prokofiev, Shostakovich, they all followed that dictum as well. Really, really important that you get that. So just make sure you can really hear those two notes. That's really it. That was all I wanted to talk about on Scheherazade today. please, please upload your videos. It'd be really interesting for me to see how you play and all of your ideas with this fantastic piece of music. So again, upload those videos. I'll really be looking forward to having a good old look at them. And remember, enjoy your music making. Bye for now.
Hello YouTube. Welcome to the masterclasses for the YouTube Symphony Orchestra. I'm Karen Vaughan. I'm the co-principal harpist for the London Symphony Orchestra, and I'd like to welcome you to LSO St Luke's, our education centre. We recorded the Internet Symphony Eroica a couple of weeks ago. I was slightly surprised to find that Tan Dun, the composer, said to me, "Harp solo," at the beginning of the piece, and I thought, oh my goodness. And actually, he starts off with a tremolo on the harp, which is done by making two strings sound the same. So we've got an E natural and an F flat, which on most instruments is the same note. But on the harp, we play the E string with the E pedal in natural and the F string with the F pedal in flat. And the notes sound the same, so you can get a tremolo just on one note. There's a big crescendo and diminuendo, so I suggest that you play very fast when it's soft, and then as it gets louder, slow it down a bit so that you don't get any buzzing. Then there's a big glissando, the strings come in. And when we get to the allegro, the melody from the beginning of the Eroica Symphony, we have a lot of chords just punctuating whatever's happening. And then we get to play the Eroica Symphony for the first time in harp history. And then we play Jasmine Flower with the percussion players. This bit is a little bit tricky on the harp because the composer has written the fingers so close together. So you have to arrange it so that the right hand takes more notes. Like that. A little bit later on, there's a rhythmic section which is with woodwinds. I think the Cor Anglais has the same rhythm. And because the composer has written repeated notes, repeated E's, you can use your F flat again to make the fingering easier. So this is much easier to do that than go on the same string. Then the music gets more and more exciting, faster and faster towards the end, and the harp part is basically punctuating the rhythm with glissandos. Now, when you're playing in a 100-piece symphony orchestra on your own on the harp, and you're asked to play very loud glissandos, it's a good idea to use some pieces of leather instead of your fingers, because your fingers will be shredded by doing very loud glissandos, and then they won't be fit for anything else. So I have got a couple of pieces of handbag strap, which I use, not for a soft glissando, because it wouldn't sound right. But for a loud glissando, you get a lot more sound and you save your fingers. So you need to find a piece of leather. Leather works better than anything else because it's more like our fingers. And you can see, I don't know whether the camera can see, but these pieces of leather are pretty shredded. And think what it would do to my fingers if I had to play the harp so loudly. In the orchestra, we've got more chance of being heard. One of the problems, of course, when you're playing with a big symphony orchestra is whether you can actually be heard on the harp. And you have to develop a really big tone. Now, I've been asked to talk about a piece that you might come across in an orchestral audition. And so I've chosen the cadenza from Swan Lake by Tchaikovsky. All the Tchaikovsky ballets have harp cadenzas in, and they're all based on dominant seventh chords. In Nutcracker, you have an A7 chord. In the Sleeping Beauty, you have a B-flat 7 chord. And in Swan Lake, you're actually basically in the key of G-flat major. So it's a D-flat 7/9 chord. The opening scene starts with arpeggios, which have to be played in time. But once you arrive at the arpeggio of D-flat, then you can play in your own time because it's a cadenza. A harp solo is in time and a harp cadenza is free. Now, the pedal setting for the beginning of this is D natural, C flat, B natural, E natural, F sharp, G natural, A flat. And the opening arpeggios are in just E minor arpeggios. And those have to be in time, in 4. And because we've got a C flat as well as a B natural enharmonically, you can use the C flat if you want in the arpeggios to make the fingering slightly easier. What I do is to go C. Then I play a 7th there, which is easier than that. Then you can change those pedals into flat. The next arpeggio is written as a D, G flat, A flat, C flat. But if you use an F sharp instead of a G flat, then it just feels like a dominant 7th. And then you can get the harp fully into 6 flats for the cadenza. Now, there are various fingerings for these arpeggios at the opening. I personally prefer to keep 4 finger groups and just take the odd number at the top, because first of all you finish on a D flat, then an F, then an A flat, and then a D. So I prefer to keep the rest of the groups the same and just take the odd number of notes at the top. So you can practice this with your thumbs alone so that you know where you're jumping to. Because that's what you need to aim for, having your thumb in the right place, and then your fingers know where to go. So that your cadenza. By this time the orchestra has stopped playing. So although it's marked piano, I think it needs to be a bit louder than that, and it should sound very light and brilliant. This is your D flat 9 chord. Then build these chords up. You always jump to the same inversion that you've just finished on. Then we have a section where the swan is doing this with her wing, and it's really quite expressive in the harp. So if you make them a little bit closer together each time. Now, I prefer to do that run as written. And I use the right hand here and then the left hand. But if you find it difficult to reach with your right hand down to the bottom of the harp, you can play one group again like this. And then you finish with the left hand in the right place. Then E for quick, little bit more spaced, and then a little bit more spaced again. Make sure you've got an E flat before you start this. And this is the big pardida in Act 2 between the Swan and the Prince. So thank you very much for watching, and I hope that this has been helpful and that you will be encouraged to participate in this project. Bye.
Hello YouTube, my name's John Alley and I'm the principal keyboard player of the London Symphony Orchestra. What you just heard there was the main theme of Tan Dun's Internet Symphony, arranged for solo piano. I'm sure that you've listened to the full orchestral version and heard Tan Dun talk about how he came to write the piece and his thought processes. So you're probably wondering what I'm doing here, as there isn't a piano in the original. Arrangements or reductions of orchestral scores often end up being a bit unpianistic, as we say, because the arranger has included as much of the original as possible, and so that there are just too many notes to play. Now, many composers compose at the piano, imagining the instruments that will ultimately play the music they've written. As an audition pianist or accompanist, we are the orchestra, and therefore we maybe have to do a bit of instant arranging of our own in order to make the music work and at the same time still sound like Mozart or whoever. In other words, we have to sort of think in reverse, if you like. It's all very well and commendable trying to play every single note of the arrangement, but if as accompanist we slow down or get in the way of the soloist, it's their audition after all. We rather defeat the purpose and probably make ourselves unpopular at the same time. So if you're going to play the Internet Symphony, you may need a bit of reorganisation of your own. At the beginning, if you've heard the original, then this won't sound like it's written for the orchestra. But in the arrangement, it's very difficult because we have octaves in the right hand spread across a very difficult stretch. And so a little trick would be, perhaps instead of playing, you just play single notes. So the effect is very, very similar, but we just leave a few notes out. And the other one is slightly later on in the piece, he writes, which of course is playable, but it's quite difficult to repeat notes at that speed, and it goes on for quite a long time. So instead we might split it between the two hands, for instance. And now about your audition. I've never regarded myself as a Beethoven specialist, so I'm only just going to play the first few bars of the Beethoven Waldstein Sonata. You'll only have a very limited time in your audition, and you must leave the panel with the best and most complete impression of your capabilities. So what are the processes? Which pieces would I like to play and in what order? How long is the audition? Very important. And specifically, what's the audition for? Let's say you have to play two pieces for the audition, so they must be contrasting. We've got four pieces to consider here: the Beethoven Waldstein, Mozart Rondo alla Turca, Brahms Intermezzo, and the Schumann Traumerei, or Dreams. You've already heard a very short example of the Beethoven. That's obviously a dramatic piece, a very good piece to begin an audition with, as it has an immediate impact. But you have to remember that it's quite a long piece, so that the audition panel may well stop you before you get to the end. But not to worry. It's not because they don't like your playing. They're concerned probably that they have another 20 pianists to listen to, and so that they must keep to time. Anyway, back to the choice. Perhaps you'd rather start with a slow piece, the Brahms or perhaps the Schumann. The Brahms has contrasting sections within it. Let me show you. It begins. And then but the whole piece lasts nearly 4.5 minutes. The Schumann, on the other hand, Traumerei, is a much shorter piece with a single mood. Personally, if I was going to play the Brahms, then I'd combine it with the Mozart, which is, of course, a very, very well-known piece. The good thing about the Mozart is that it's got several repeated sections, so that if you're short of time, you can play it with the repeats or without the repeats, meaning that you can tailor the music to suit the amount of time you have. The time is a very important point. Audition panels hate it when auditionees play for too long, and it's usually best to be slightly shorter than too long. On the other hand, I'd put the Schumann with the Beethoven. Well, why? Well, presuming they've stopped you before you got to the end of the Beethoven, the Schumann is quite short, reflective, and a perfect antidote. The audition experience, if that's the word, is unique, and for many people, frightening. But we all have to do it to help us move on through our musical lives. And having to give the best account of yourself and your artistry without the benefit of an audience is difficult. Lots of nerves and apprehension without the help that an audience brings. So here are just a few tips. Rather than simply practicing your audition pieces in the comfort of your home, go through the whole process in front of people you don't want to play to. I do mean anyone. Drag them off the street if necessary. It also means the whole audition, as though it was the real thing. An actor, if you like, would get into character before he or she goes on the stage, so that it might help to think of the whole process as a scene. It begins before you enter the audition room. It includes any conversation you may have with the panel and any announcement you may make about the music you're going to play. Joking with the panel is not always in your best interests. "What are you going to play?" an auditionee was asked. "Well," came the reply, "if you don't recognise it within the first 10 bars, we're all wasting our time." Not recommended. If the piano that you play is unknown to you, do try a few notes. If you're unsure, then ask the panel. I'm sure they won't mind. The phrase that is used nowadays is "in your space," get in your space. So create the space that you're going to be in and be in it, if you like. Plan your time around the audition. Make it the highlight, if that's not the wrong word, or peak of your day. If you were playing a recital, for instance, then you wouldn't play the pieces endlessly before the concert, and the same applies to an audition. Many people make this mistake so that by the time they get to the audition, they're musically and technically exhausted when they should be at their best. In other words, they've used up all their adrenaline and just left with a bag of nerves. Try to avoid this as well. And if you're worried about certain passages of the music, practice them slowly on the day, but not just that particular bit. Include the parts either side so that when it comes to playing the whole passage, the horrible bit merges with the rest of the music and doesn't jump out at you. Well, I hope that I haven't made it an even more daunting prospect than it was before you watched this. Think the process through logically. Even perhaps write yourself a script, like I did, just to make certain that you cover all the exits. And happy auditioning.